Hello and welcome to the Main Cave. Now in today's video I've got the 8bitdo retro keyboard and I'll be answering some of the questions you may have about it, such as what does it sound like? Does it work with the Mac? Does it have RGB? And some other really useful stuff. So if you're new here, we make regular videos on gaming and technology for your smart home, so please do consider subscribing as we may make a video to make your life easier and I wouldn't want you to miss out. So do hit subscribe, I'd really appreciate it. So first up then, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. I call the company 8bitdo, as that's the official way confirmed by the company themselves. But you are allowed to say however you want, such as 8bitdo. I just choose the correct way. So when it comes to keyboards then, I'm not particularly a beginner, as I have quite a few knocking around and a few I've upgraded with new switches, keycaps, lube, padding, etc. But I'm in no way even close to an authority on keyboards. So I like to go into my reviews as a consumer first and foremost, then as an expert. So what you'll expect from me here is what I enjoyed using as a stock keyboard out of the box with no modifications. I may make some at some point, I may add a few bits here and there, but as it is, the keyboard is pretty good straight out of the box. So in this video, we'll be going through the unboxing, the price, the stats, the look and feel, the buttons, the two panic buttons, the connections, typing or gaming, software, sound test, and finally what I don't like about this. But once it arrived, it was packaged very nicely, as you'd expect from 8bitdo out of the box. Inside, very easy, you get yourself a USB cable, instruction manual, stickers, a dual button piece, which I call the panic button, and the keyboard itself. Now the reason I was excited for this is they were advertising this as a stacked keyboard for only £89. Now I say £89, that is still a fair chunk of money, but in terms of features on this, it appears value, and I'll talk about features later on. So this is the Spec then, this is the 87 key keyboard with an N key rollover, which basically means multiple presses and multiple keys gets registered. Has an aluminium plate, hot swappable PCB plate, Kel blocks, white switches, die-sub PBT keycaps, 2.4 GHz wired or Bluetooth, programmable panic buttons, and the physical volume knob. So here's some more stats then, and the one that stands out for me is the battery life. 200 hours on a 4-hour charge will do me nicely. The reason it's much is most likely is there are no RGB draining it. So if you do want to use this in the dark, I hope you can touch type. The frame thickness is from around 37mm to about 20mm at the front. Keys are roughly another 10mm on top of that, and it weighs in at 1048 grams, just over a kilogram. Out of the box then, it looks fantastic, but my first thoughts were that it was a lot darker than I'd expected. In the pics on the website, it was almost a pure white, but when it arrived, it was much more of an Amiga white, an almost brownish colour. This is the N colour. There is another one called the Famicom, if that one takes your fancy. They really have nailed the aesthetics of a retro keyboard. The physical buttons along the top for connection switching, volume, and 3 function buttons. The top right is the power LED, which they call their classic power status LED. On the back of the keyboard is the USB-C port for a wired connection, and here's where the USB dongle sits nicely out of the way so you don't lose it. Along from that is 4 3.5mm ports labelled A, B, X and Y, and more of them later, as that's for the included panic buttons. Then flip it over and it has 4 rubber feet to keep it on the desk, of which they do a very good job. My issue here is that it's not particularly light or heavy, as we said, just over a kilogram. It's somewhere in the middle, and well, kind of knocking it on the back, it does feel a touch hollow, but don't let that put you off. The keycaps themselves, as we said, are die-sub, and so far so good. I'm not sure how they will hold up after months of use, but to type on it, they feel good so far. The F and the J keys had indentations, giving a nod that this is more suited for typing than gaming, but I'll let you know my experiences later. A note for fellow UK viewers here that this is the US layout only, so either change your PC to US or deal with the changes. I will talk about this later, but most of the key layout is fine on a Mac. Also standing out there are 2 large buttons, bottom right, A and B. They aren't the same as the panic buttons, they are separate and can be controlled in the software. Space, backspace, shift all have the usual stabilisers that appear to be a little bit lubed, but again, I'll probably be taking this apart at some point to see how it is easier to mod at a later date. Keys have a very short pre-travel before it clicks and actuates, and if you want to slap it down, there's another 2 or 3 millimeters post-travel. There's no fancy continuous measuring, as with a few more keyboards that are coming out. It's just get to the point, click and register. So I mentioned earlier what I call these panic buttons, and they are officially called super buttons. There are 2 of them, and they're basically large keys with green Gateron switches underneath. The bottom is one large rubber pad to help it stick to the desk, and not much else. When pressed in, they give a satisfying slap, and it's almost impossible to miss them when you want to press one. They are huge. The box itself is surprisingly heavy at 266 gram, and it's wired into the keyboard into one of those ports we talked about earlier, A, B, X or Y, doesn't matter which one. The cable is long enough, about 1 meter, for it to be set out of the way somewhere on your desk. So just pick one of the keys, it doesn't matter, and then you have up to 4 sets, meaning you can have 8 panic buttons, all for various functions. These buttons really are genius. Initially, I thought it was just a bit of fun, but since then I've come to rely on them. Programming them couldn't be easier and can be done on the fly on the keyboard and takes seconds and can be used for pretty much any single or multiple keyboard press. It can also be added to them via software, which I'll go through later, and you may think they're a gimmick, but trust me, they are genuinely useful. Connections now, and you have a choice of 3. You can have wired, 2.4 GHz for using the dongle, or Bluetooth. As I said, it comes with a dongle, and I've only managed to get it to work with this dongle. I couldn't get it to work with my Ultimate Controller dongle or my wireless adapter 2. So, not sure there is a way, but I hope there is in the future. This keyboard is supposed to work with Windows only, and that's true in terms of the Ultimate software, which won't work, but it does physically work with a Mac, and it works well. You can use wired or Bluetooth with no issues at all. Even the panic buttons work and can be mapped on the fly when connected to a Mac to whatever you need them to be. If you want to game with this, you most likely need to be going 2.4 GHz or wired for the fastest connection. Bluetooth is okay, it's just you want to use it for office work, which I tend to do on my Mac for ease of use. Speaking of that, and how does it fare gaming or typing? Well, either for me. If you type, you can get quite a good hit rate, albeit I'm used to a non-UK enter key, it does take some muscle memory. Gaming is also great, the switches are tactile and click down with great satisfaction. Playing for hours on this was both comfortable and responsive. I even mapped the panic buttons to in-game functions, which was excellent. If you are sensitive to a clicky keyboard though, then this may not be for you, as it is quite loud. Which leads me nicely onto the sound test, and here's a quick sound test for you, including the panic buttons. More added value now, and this comes in the form of the comprehensive app, which is currently Windows only, called the 8bitdo Ultimate Software version 2. Just download it from the website and fire it up. First thing to do is just make sure you're on the latest firmware, then create a profile and get tweaking. The main screen is where you can change your buttons, including the 2 panic buttons, change them to whatever you want really, alphanumeric, functions, mouse clicks, kind of anything really. You can also disable the Windows key here, the tab, etc. for a sort of like a gaming mode. Then next along is macros, where you set any number of key presses and assign it to a button. This may be useful for someone wanting to put it onto one of their panic buttons for a game of specific button presses. Then finally, the volume section is to control increments of 1 click of the volume knob for 2 up to 10. All in all, a good app, if not for a few spelling mistakes, but it's fine. So what about things that I don't like? So these are personal to me, and I was to say most people will love this keyboard, but for me there's just a few things. Firstly, I do wish it had a backlight. I get the battery will take a hit, but even a white light just behind the keycaps would help in dimly lit scenarios. And there's also only a caps lock and a scroll lock indicator. Next, it's quite a high keyboard. As I said, it goes up to 37mm plus the keys on top. So unless you have large hands, I'd say a wrist rest may be needed for some people. And also, there's no angle adjustment, so what you see is what you get. And a small niggle for me is the volume key is a bit tight to the connection knob, and I freely turn it without adjusting your grip. It's not very comfortable to use, but along with that, there's also no mute switch. Now that would have been nice if the volume knob could be pressed in to be muted. As is, I programmed the A key on the keyboard to be mute. So would I recommend this? Absolutely I would. It feels great, it looks fantastic, it's well built, plenty of features and decent software. For £89 you're getting a lot of bang for your buck, even with those few small negatives I mentioned. So have a look, and then I'll leave links down below where you can get hold of this. Please do let me know what you think. Have you got one? How are you thinking about picking one up? Please like, please subscribe. Till the next video. Bye bye.